Hi, everyone. Welcome to Segment. We're really happy to host you all here. Thanks for your interest in my talk. And yeah, I'm here to tell you a story about how I kind of built a remote team by accident without realizing it, and how it made my team better. Is the clicker working? Okay, cool. My story now. Come on. Okay, I'm just gonna stand here. Okay, so before we get started, I would like to just introduce two concepts and kind of make a distinction here between the two kind of remote engineering teams that you could build. First one is for a remote first team. It means it's just a remote team from the start. Maybe founders or managers start out remote and then they keep hiring people from different locations. A second sort of category, which is kind of a category where my team is in, is remote-friendly sort of teams, where you still have headquarters, you still have part of your team co-located in one place, and then you accommodate remote employees. And then there's kind of this subcategory of category 2 that I found myself in that was accidentally remote or organically remote. It's when you don't even realize and you built a distributed team. So you made your first remote hire. You decide to give it a try. Like maybe you hired a contractor somewhere. Maybe your company just opened a new office and you want to try something different. And that was kind of the case at Segment. We had just recently opened an office in Vancouver, and it was also my first time as an engineering manager, my first time as a hiring manager trying to build my team. And I just decided to give it a try. I'd worked remote before, and I thought it would be an interesting experience to try and introduce that concept maybe to Segment, and especially on my team. So you made your first hire. What are some of the steps that you take to make sure that they're successful and that they're getting the same first-class experience that your other employees are getting? But first, let me back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about the story. My first time as a manager, my first time as a hiring manager, my first time trying to hire someone, I was successful to hire some folks in San Francisco, and I just decided to try and expand things a little better. And hiring my first remote engineer was really a turning point for my entire team. It completely changed the way we operated. It created this sort of discipline that we were lacking for a little while. And basically what I'm gonna do with this talk now is tell you a few of the lessons that we learned. Wow. Let me back up again and start with a problem. So I joined this team, my first time managing, my first time tech leading, and all of a sudden I'm presented with this vast array of systems that I had to own. A massive area that I had to, and by the way, I managed the customer experience engineering team at Segment. That means basically almost every touch point with our customers, from their first time experience to setting up their first integration with Segment to getting their first report or getting their first bill. So one of the things we had to own was the billing system. And because we were co-located, because the other teams are around, we're used to this pattern. Like, how does the billing system work again? We could just go in and ask Bob. And then we're like, hey, Bob, how does the old legacy plan from self-service work? How does someone graduate from a self-service customer to an enterprise customer? How do I do something? How do we deal with how do I deal with webhooks? How do I do whatever? And at the same time, there's Bob's analysis and Charlie's that you keep asking about all of these things that you don't understand. So you just keep coming back to them, and they get really annoyed, and your team is also not making that much progress. And what happens when Bob is out of office? And this is a true story. It was just last year. We're on a holiday, everyone is off, and then one of the systems goes nuts. I get a lot of pages, I get a lot of alerts. I'm in Toronto visiting some friends. It's like the entire week off. Everyone's taking the week off. And I just realized, oh my God, things are just broken. I have to fix all of this stuff because customers are gonna need their reports just the next week. What do we do about it? And I can't reach Bob, I can't reach anyone. I'm on my own. I'm just gonna have to sift through logs, look at source code, trying to reverse engineer what's going on. And that just eats up my entire holiday, because it's one of the longest incidents I've been part of, because I couldn't get a hold of anyone to help me out. So we knew something needed to change. These folks were getting, the Bobs of the world were getting annoyed. My team is getting frustrated because they can't get a lot of stuff done. They can't understand really the reason why certain things are built in certain ways. I'm getting frustrated too. And then we decided to try something a little different. So here's the TLDR of the things that we learned that made our team a lot more effective as just an engineering team. Was number one, and I'll get into this, it's called keeping devs sane. And the second one was doubling down on async communication. One of the things I realized is like, maybe there's some constraints that would be interesting that I could invite into my team. So why is it that it's like so easy and so convenient to just go and ping someone or just like tap someone on the shoulder and ask a question? Maybe we need to get a little bit more diligent and start doubling down on documenting some of our decisions. And it turns out that my team wasn't the only one that was really facing this sort of communication challenges. So Gerhard, one of our engineering managers here, kind of kickstarted this little framework that he calls keeping devs sane. And basically, the TLDR for keeping devs sane is like just fostering communication between engineers, designers, and product managers. It is thinking critically about the things that you're building, and also at the same time documenting your decisions and communicating your decisions explicitly. I put together a little diagram of how keeping devs sane works. And you'll notice that it's actually not that complicated. So we start out with this step that we call the product requirement document. And basically the first thing that we're trying to get out of this is what it is that we're building and why do we think it's an important thing to build this. And this is one of the most cross-functional parts of the process, is when you involve a designer, a product manager, and an engineer. And then once you know what it is that you want to build and why, you move on to the next step called the solution design document. And this is one of the parts where my team benefited the most. It's the moment that you invite other parts of the organization to contribute in the journey of the like where you're trying to take the architecture to. And it usually involves product managers and engineers. This is where you get feedback from other engineers in the company, regardless of where they are. And you just try and propose a solution for the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you have fun after that. It's usually just the engineers having fun. So I decided to make a quick video of what a product requirement document looks like. And you see that it's actually not that much ceremony, and it's something pretty simple. So this is a product requirement doc I wrote for one of the projects that I was pitching my team on. And basically, I'm trying to explain what are the jobs we think should be done, a little bit of how I thought that problem should be solved, and I collect a little bit of evidence of like why other people thought that was an important problem to solve. And then in the next step, I started working with one of my tech leads on my team, and that's called the solution design document. And you see one thing that's really interesting about all of this is we're writing everything down. I know it sounds like, in retrospect, it's like, but that's just so easy now, like looking back. Maybe I just need to document the risks and assumptions. I just need to document the change that I'm thinking of making. And even though it might sound a little obvious, it turned out to be a really, really good exercise, especially across locations. So now I had my tech lead in Vancouver working on what he thought was the best idea, and other folks were commenting, they're like giving their feedback and getting approval and buy-in from some other people. So this worked out so well for us using tools like Dropbox Paper or Google Docs to communicate our ideas and like taking down notes that we kind of got addicted to async communication. And basically almost everything that we do today across San Francisco and Vancouver is done async. So here's an example of how we do pull requests. You see that there's not that much nitpicking on the code or anything. The thing I wanted to showcase here is the level of communication that we're trying to achieve here. And basically, in this case, I have a little QA plan that I put, and for every time something goes to production, and that just kind of forces like that exercise of going through, oh, what happens if this thing fails? What happens if we're on a holiday? What happens if customers can't get their reports in a week? What sort of metrics should we be looking at? How do we look at the code to understand what the decisions were made? And with just in Git and GitHub, on their own, we started to improve our practices a lot more. One of the things that we try and over-document and over-communicate asynchronously through text of the things that we're doing. So even our commit messages now, we're trying to force ourselves to use the Git format, where you just don't pass just a short message for anything that you do. You actually try and explain what it is that you're doing and why. Another thing that kind of came up organically that I thought was really good was like I realized, well, since we're doing all of these things async, we're making decisions async, why am I forcing everyone to get on a Zoom call every morning to give their status update? And like video calls always fail anyway. It's super annoying. You always end up wanting to go to the phone or something. People get frustrated. You force everyone to be online at the same time. So one of our engineers just suggested, like, why don't we just do it through text? And over time, we now finally have all of our engineers doing the exact same thing. They're sharing all of their status updates. And one of the things that we really enjoy is that now we can actually follow up on any of the things that were discussed during our status sharing. So in here, I can just pick one of these. So I picked Mei-chan's status update in this case, and I basically just followed up on what I thought was important to follow up on. You see here again the solution design document right here, where I'm following up like, oh, I did a little bit of the work and I left some instructions, and I wasn't in the office, Mei-chan wasn't in the office, we weren't in the same location, and we collaborated. Another thing, it was so ingrained and so much like part of everything that we do that this is like a very simple example of when we needed to decide on the schema for a database table. I wanted to run a migration. I wasn't sure. I was making them clear, and easy enough. I basically put together a Dropbox paper document, invited a lot of the engineers from my team to just come in and comment and help me document the decisions. Now everyone understands how this database table works, and we also have a lot of fun too. We love emoji and stickers. Another thing that I thought was incredibly important, and it completely shifted my mindset with regards to infrastructure and code and decisions, was moving to Terraform. I don't know if people here are familiar with infrastructure as code, but that turned out to be an amazing decision that we made and something that we doubled down on. So now we do not make a single change to infrastructure without explaining why, what it's used for, getting buy-in from other people, and having that history of decisions of why something was done the way that it was done. And that completely changed the way we make any decision. I'm tempted now, every time I use maybe a SaaS tool or something that just has a UI, I keep thinking, what if Bob's not around? What if I'm not around? I would love to have this in code and be able to have my source control tell a story about why that decision was made. And more. Of course, we still use some other tools like email, Slack, and the sort of algorithm that we have is you don't ping anyone directly unless it's absolutely necessary. So I tend to ask people to start email, post it on a public Slack channel, Slack DM, and if you can't solve it any other way, then just try and schedule a meeting. Of course, we use Zoom meetings. It's the best tool we found, and I think there's going to be a workshop about Zoom. It's a great tool. One thing that I try and make sure always happens is doing remote one-on-ones with my reports that are remote. We meet every week for 30 minutes where we talk through some of the work that we're doing, how they're feeling. We talk about their career trajectory. I make career development plans that are tailored for each one of my reports. And of course, it also includes the limitations or the challenges or how we're going to work around them not being in the same office as me. And sort of, we try and have actionable items and things that we can do to make them successful. Another thing I try to do at least once a week is to also do an hour of remote pair programming. to make sure I'm dog fooding the tools that they're using to communicate remotely, and also to make sure that I'm still on top of what's happening on the technical side. And the lessons I learned and my team learned, and which in turn made us a much more disciplined and productive engineering team, was that we communicate async by default and we document by default. We went from asking how the billing system work to this quote that I got from Maxime, one of my remote hires, on his 30-day check-in after he joined. And he said he loved how easy it is to find information on anything I need, and all I have to do is to look at the history of decisions. So that was like the moment I heard this, that was the validation that I needed to see that like those changes and those constraints that we imposed on ourselves worked well. Our devs are sane, finally. And that's it.
Before we move on to the panel, we can take some live questions for a couple of minutes if there are any questions.
With your remote hires, did you have them spend like a month or two in the main office first, or 100% remote the whole time?
So one thing we did with all of them was to bring them for what we call a cycle. So we basically break our work into 6-week increment. So we usually bring them so they can do the full, because we also have an onboarding period within segments. So we try and line it up to when there's like another group of people starting, then they come in for that week. And if I make it optional. If they want to stay, they can stay. If they don't, they can go back. But yeah, it's been like, they come in for like 6 weeks. Yeah. But it's funny that 60% of my team is remote. So when someone comes to onboard here, they're actually just onboarding with Segment, not so much with the team.
Great talk. One of the questions I had was around documentation sprawl. So one of the problems we're facing right now is that developers and teams have different ways in which they want to maintain their own docs. So some people use Dropbox Paper, some people use Confluence, GitHub for the engineers, but it's starting to become a problem where it's all over the place. I was wondering if you guys had any tips for wrangling that in.
Sure. So one of the things that happened organically too, it didn't come from me, was one of my engineers in San Francisco, when we made our first remote hire, she prepared a getting started document for this new person coming in. And she basically collected all the bits of documentation that we had and like put them in one place. And then we doubled down on it and like turned it into the CX engineering homepage. And now it actually includes, it's like an index of all of our documentation. Some documentation is still on GitHub, so we like to collocate documentation with code sometimes. But all of our design decisions are actually, because the whole company uses Dropbox Paper, it makes it a lot easier for us to standardize on something. And then we use like folders, and then all of the PRDs, all of the solution design documents, they always go into the same folder so anyone can see. But yeah, it takes a lot of work, especially from me, to make sure the documentation is up to date. But it's an investment I'm willing to make.
Thanks again for your insight. How do you guys make sure that the documentation stays up to date? Like, one of the problems we have is that they write it when they're designing the doc, and then during the reviews, sometimes decisions change, code changes, and somehow the implementation has changed. No one ever goes back and updates the document, and then you end up with a bunch of stale documents.
So that's ingrained in our culture, and I try and be very diligent with that. So it's on me to like, it has to start from the leader, right? And like from there, you just kind of try and create that. So for example, one of the things that I do is that we have a pull request template on GitHub where it actually specifically asks for the document of the thing that you're working on. So you have to post it in there. And if you don't, I'll see that you didn't, and I'll ask you to do it. And I won't let you merge your pull request before the document's in there. Another thing that we do is like the homepage, where we try and keep everything up to date. And one of the things that we do is like we also try and bring revisions into the template. So for example, for the SDD template for solution design, we actually have a little table that has all the revisions. and who approved a certain revision and what was their feedback on the revision. So it just kind of forces you to go back and like get an approval from like at least someone else. But yeah, of course, things change all the time. So for example, today, one of our projects like changed completely as we dug a little bit more into the code base. The Bob from that code base has already left, and we had to do a little bit more digging to understand like and prototype some of the stuff. And we learned that, oh yeah, everything else that we've written in that document is now invalid. So we came back and wrote that as a revision. So oh yeah, it turns out that our assumptions were wrong. Here's why, and we'll start fresh. But yeah, it's hard.